Tonight we're going to talk about family. So what does family mean? In the ideal, family is a set of parents and some children, maybe their children and their children, on, to generations. But there's all sorts of variants to family. Some people live with just one parent, or they half time between two parents, or sometimes, they live with grandparents or some other relative. All right. Tonight we're talking about the relationships within family. So even if you don't live with a mom or dad at home, there might be somebody filling the role of mom or filling the role of dad for you. Maybe there's one parent working hard to fill the roles of both. So we're going to talk about what we're called in filling each of those roles. So first, let's face it, most people who are parents want to be the best parents they can be. Nobody wants to be a bad parent. And nobody wants to be a bad child, bad son or daughter, right? You guys want to be the best son or daughter you can be to your parents, right? The most responsible, helpful, right? I sure didn't. I thought I was pretty good. I thought I was a pretty good kid. But I'm going to tell you guys a story tonight. But first, let me start with my parents. My dad was an immigrant from Italy who was very hard on the rules. He was quick to judge those who made mistakes or he thought were lazy. But he worked very hard to provide for our family. He was very genial, and he came to this country without higher education, couldn't speak the language, was dark-skinned and moved to Alabama in the 60s. And these were not traits that were very friendly to in Alabama in the 60s, let me tell you. But he worked really hard, he was a nice guy, and he did really well, lived the American dream, persevered through all that. My mom was truly a gift in my life. My mother never had a bad word to say about anybody. She didn't believe, she was daughter of a church minister, and was taught and always believed that nobody's better than anybody else, and so you shouldn't judge other people. You don't sit higher than them, so nobody gets the opportunity to sit in judgment over others. So, had a good set of parents. But this is how I found out I was a rotten child at the age of 18. I came home one weekend when my parents had been away. I came in the car that they provided me, home from college that they paid for, to a house that they provided, right? And I came in, and let me tell you, I've got a very sensitive olfactory. Bad smells really, really bother me. I have a very sensitive nose. So, come into the house, and I get into the kitchen, I'm like, what is this smell? I mean, it was like an animal had died in one of the cabinets. So it was so strong, I had to search all through the cabinets, and finally I found this bag of rotted potatoes in the island. And I was like, this is horrible. I didn't want to touch it. So what would a good son have done? A good son would have just taken the rotten potato bag, put it in the bag of trash in the kitchen, closed it up, taken it out to the dumpster, and been done with it, right? Not me. No. I took the time to find a piece of paper and a pen to write a note to my parents about something like this. If anybody wants to know what the bad, horrible smell in this kitchen is, it's this rotting sack of potatoes here in the island. So, I told you I've never seen my mom mad. She was so mad. She was so ticked off, and I got everything I deserved for that one because it was a horrible thing to do, right? So, the reason I tell you this story is because we're not always great at filling the roles we're in, right? I was a real piece of work when I was a young kid. But I thought I was a really good kid. Remember, I said, I thought I was a really good kid. Well, what about parents? And I'm not even going to talk stories about how great of a parent I've been after that story about how great of a kid I was. But just as we're never perfect children, we're not going to be perfect parents. All right? And my kids, who were really good at pointing out any mistake I would make as a parent to them, now have the opportunity to make beautiful mistakes with their children as well. And they will, because that's what we do. We're broken, fallen people who make mistakes. So the beauty of this is that God gave us a model, an example of how to actually fill the roles that we're in the family, in the Holy Family. So we can look at the Holy Family to show model behavior, how we should treat each other as parents to children, as children to parents. Jesus came into this world to live in a family, and that's why his family is called the Holy Family. He was nurtured by a loving mother and was taught a trade by his father. He was obedient to Mary and Joseph and gave us an example of how to live in holiness in family and in work life. So, figuring out how to best fulfill our role in family is important. All right, every organization has roles. In a company, there's a role of owner, CEO, somebody who leads and makes decisions that affect everybody in the company. You know, a small business owner, for example, takes on all the responsibilities and risks of an organization. Okay, they train employees, teach them how to work, manage everybody in the organization. But every success or failure of a small business points back to that owner or small business owner. The employees trade their time and effort to do the work that is given them by the owner to make the business as good of a business as it can be. They'll get paid extra if they do extra work or put in overtime, but they're called to do their responsibility. All sane employees want a good boss, and all sane bosses want good employees. And it's similar in families, right? Parents have the responsibility for success and failure of the family, ultimately. Parents have the responsibility of making a living, of feeding, nurturing, instructing, bathing, and loving their children. Children have the responsibility of obeying, learning, and assisting the family household needs, etc., etc. As I said earlier, not all of us are fortunate to live in the ideal situation, like in the Holy Family. But in all families, regardless of shape, size, complexity, deficiency, we're all called to look toward the models given to us by the Holy Family, to be our guide and how to act and fulfill our role. So let's talk about motherhood first. God willed that Jesus Christ should have a true human mother. God chose Mary to be Jesus' mother. We know from the Gospel of Luke that the Archangel Gabriel visited Mary and announced God's favor with her, and that she would bear God's son. As a single virgin, think of what this must have felt like. And remember, this was a time when women were stoned for adultery, and she was come down and given this news. She said yes to God's will. Her response to the astounding news was, quote, "May it be done to me according to your word." This yes of Mary is the yes that we're all called to as Christians, and it's the yes of all mothers. Mothers and children share a unique bond. A mother carries a child in the womb, and her body is beautifully formed to nurture that child and life. And a yes of a mother doesn't end at birth. It's said every time a mother puts her own needs aside for the love of that child. So let's take a moment to think about our own mothers, or a woman in your life that's filling the role of a mother. How has she said yes to you? How does she show you love? Now, if you're in the habit of being critical of your mom, like reflexively, stop. Just get it out of your head, all right? This is not about that. This is your chance to focus on your mother or that person filling the role. To think about the times that she's loved you when you've been hurt. that she gave you comfort. Or think about the times she's worked hard to make sure you get to school or an appointment or a game on time. Or think about a breakfast, lunch, or dinner she may have made you, even though she was stressed, rushed, or tired herself. Or just think about any time when she showed you unconditional love when you truly needed it. When you were low and down and needed that. Later in the evening, we're going to come back to this, so keep that in mind. Now, fathers. Fathers today are mocked and derided publicly in our culture. It's ugly, and the intent is evil, because ultimately those people mocking fathers are mocking God our Father. Alright? It's the same thing, it's the same intent. I hope you guys recognize and reject this kind of behavior. Alright? And don't participate in it. Fathers play a unique and important role, just like mothers do, but obviously in a different way. Let's look at the Holy Family's example. When Joseph learned of Mary's pregnancy, he's freaked out because he knows the child's not his. Joseph is also visited by an angel who tells him not to fear and to take Mary and her child into his home and to name the child Jesus. Joseph does as the Lord instructs, takes Mary into his home. He finds a safe place for Mary to have Jesus on their journey to the census. Joseph is again visited by an angel who tells him to take Mary to Egypt to escape Herod, which he does. So Joseph's yeses to God involve the protection of Mary and Jesus. In the same way, fathers are often called to protect life and to provide security for their families. Who is it in the movies that you see when there's like some undescribed noise downstairs? Who grabs the bat and goes down to confront whatever it is? It's the dad, right? I've never had that experience, by the way. I'm not going downstairs for noise. But fathers play a unique role in the formation of discipline and fortitude in their children's lives. And we can guess this happened also in the life of Jesus, as Joseph taught him carpentry, for instance. So now let's think about our fathers. Just in the case of your mother, if your reflexive thing is to be critical of your father, just put that aside. Right now, focus on the ways your father or person filling that role has filled that role in your life. How has he been like Joseph? Protecting you or instructing you? Has he worked to provide income for your family? Has he driven you to games, school, or appointments? Has he ever had to protect you or your family from bad actors? Has he taught you any skills you now have? My dad actually taught me carpentry. We had all the tools in shop class before, when I got to shop class in high school, it was like, oh, I know all this, I know this. He didn't have a son like Jesus, but he taught me carpentry. But has your dad taught you any skills? How to build something, how to diagnose something, how to repair something, how to throw a football, or do math. Later on, we'll come back to this. So, okay, at this point, let's stop and reaffirm something. I know I've asked this separately about your mom and dad, but now let's really stop. If we realize that our parents might be messed up, let's stop thinking how we wish they would be better. And let's spend the rest of this evening, in fact, you can spend the rest of your life, rest of this month, focused on how we can best fill the roles that we play in the family. How we can be the best sons and daughters that we're called to be. After all, the only role player that we can ever hope to control is the one we're playing, right? It's us. So, what are we called to be as children? How are we called to act? By the way, who in this room is a child? Okay. All right. Who in this room is a parent? There's a few of us. Whitney, Bridget, Ethan, me, Liz. We're parents. Few people are called to be parents, but you know what? Everybody's called to be children. or I didn't call it. You are a child. If you're born, you're here. We're all children. That's one of the cool things about being a child, is that everybody is one, everybody has been one, and everybody always will be one, right? So it's such an important role that, one, it made God's top 10 list. Anybody know what the Fourth Commandment, how the Fourth Commandment reads? Alex?
Honor your father and mother.
Exactly. Very good. Honor your father and mother. And number 2, Jesus elevates the disposition of children when he calls us to be like children, with our hearts open to him. When his disciples asked him, hey, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called a child over to him, placed in their midst, and said, Amen, I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. That's pretty powerful, right? Humble yourself like a child. So humility. Who rocks humility? Who's like the best here at humility? Yeah, right. Yeah. That's the funny thing about humility. You really aren't humble if you think you're great at it, right? Saint Bernard defines the virtue of humility as a virtue by which a man, knowing himself as he truly is, abases himself. Basically, it means just step off the pedestal you've put yourself on. All right? Now, as a caution, this doesn't mean thinking of your gifts as lower than they truly are. Because every gift we have is a gift from God, right? The point is, you just shouldn't think of your gifts that you possess as being greater than the gifts that somebody else possesses. If anything, grant them the superiority of the position, all right? And keep yourself in check. So, but you'd be thankful that God's given both of you great gifts, right? So in the role of children dealing with parents, this means showing respect for our parents and submitting to their demands, even when you don't like those just demands. I mean, humility is hard, but it's the right way to be. In fact, you will find that if you going through life, if you are humble, you will get along with people much better than otherwise. And I guarantee you'll have a better relationship with your parents if you show humility to them, especially to their just demands. You know, if their demands are just, it's our job as children to submit to them. So, do you honor your mother and father? Do we honor our mother and father? I mean, I don't mean like just have you once. Like, yeah, I said thanks that one time, you know, when that thing, you know, like that. No, I mean, does our behavior, our language, our attitude, our inmost being, and our hearts, do we honor our mother, father in everything we do? Now, nobody's perfect, and I told you one of, at least, you know, and some of you have heard more of my idiot stories from when I was younger. But, and we all need to be recognize our own failures, but we need to ask ourselves, fairly, do we show in our actions how much we appreciate the blessings from those who are in our lives, the closest to us in our lives? Okay, so look, I know it's hard because our parents aren't perfect. And sometimes we think they're making mistakes because of what they're asking of us. But if Jesus, God incarnate, coming down from heaven, who was infinitely surpassing his parents in knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, if he could submit to his parents, I think we could too, right? So, let's continue to remember the example of the Holy Family. Recall, I'm going to give you a story. Remember when Jesus was lagged behind the caravan? His parents left with the traveling company, and all of a sudden they realized, hey, where's Jesus? And nowhere to be found, right? Now think about it this way. You're given the task of guarding a godchild, and you'll lose them. right? So they were freaking out and they were upset. They find him in the temple. You could understand why they would be upset. Well, he explains himself, and they tell him how concerned they are. He doesn't argue back. But here's what the quote is. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them, and advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. So let's try and emulate Jesus' role in the Holy Family, to be obedient to our parents and honor them. Like I said in the beginning, families are all different nowadays, but we can fulfill the role that we're in the best way we can, in the way God calls us, with effort. So let's go talk about this in small group. That's it.